Good evening. It's now 6:30 and I call the regular meeting of the Victoria City Council to order. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item on our agenda this evening is announcements. Everyone is invited to join us for our next Donuts in Victoria event on October 16th at 9 a.m., where our city engineer will provide an update on our planned transportation projects in Victoria. Donuts in Victoria will be held at the Victoria Rec Center, and you can learn more about this event on the city's website. Our next council workshop will be held on Tuesday, November 12th at 5 p.m. for a budget discussion in preparation for the 2025 final budget and tax levy. Please note this is a Tuesday. That's a date change due to Veterans Day falling on a Monday this year. Our annual Truth in Taxation budget hearing has been scheduled for 6:30 p.m. on Monday, December 9th. During this meeting, we'll be taking formal public input on our 2025 proposed budget and levy. However, we welcome and encourage your comments now as we are busy preparing our 2025 budget. You can email your comments directly to council or city manager or submit them through our comments portal on our website. In other announcements, we invite everyone to come out for our annual Halloween event, which will be held on Saturday, October 26th. This family-friendly event is organized by the Victoria Lions and the Victoria Business Association and will take place in downtown Victoria at participating businesses from 1 to 2 p.m. There will also be family-friendly games at Bayfront Park from 1:30 to 3:30, and we hope to see you all there. That concludes our announcements for this evening. Our next order of business is to adopt the final agenda. Council, can I get a motion?
Motion to adopt the final agenda.
We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to our next item, which is the open forum. This is the opportunity for anyone to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda and not in application form that will be coming to the council at a future date. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda this evening? It is. Yes, it is. So we'll get to you when we get to that part of the agenda. No problem. Yes. Seeing none, we will be moving on to our consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are routine administrative and do not require deliberation or are housekeeping items required by law. They're approved with one vote unless someone requests an item to be considered separately. Ms. Hardy, does staff wish to pull any consent agenda items for separate discussion and vote?
None from staff, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Council, is there any items you'd like to see pulled for separate discussion and vote?
I would like to pull 5.7.
5.7, Councilmember Roberts. Any others? Is there anyone from the audience who would like to pull a consent agenda item for separate discussion and vote? Clerk, let the record reflect that item 5.7 has been pulled for further discussion. So we will take care of that one first. Wait a second. We're going to ask for a motion for the balance of the consent agenda first.
Motion for a balance of the consent agenda.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Now on to 5.7, which was removed from the consent agenda for a separate discussion and vote. Councilmember Roberts, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to pull this just for some transparency. I know there's been some chatter out there that some of the park amenities weren't up to snuff and the neighborhoods weren't involved, but being that this is the second phase, I just wanted to point out that city staff and our Parks and Rec group have done a great job on this, and this was kind of the plan all along, right? Get the tot lots done first, and then they had a meeting with the neighborhood at a pop-up in the park, which had good turnout to get their feedback on this, and it looks like a lot of climbing stuff was built in this neighborhood. So I just wanted to point out that there was a lot of community involvement on this particular park, and staff in Parks and Rec did a great job on it.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Roberts. Council, any additional comments, questions on this item? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to authorize the second phase of the Deer Run 1 playground replacement project in the amount not to exceed $40,000.
Thank you. We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second with Councilmember Rife. And all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Now moving on to our regular agenda. First item this evening, item 6.1 is a variance request for 6920 Foxglove Circle. Kicking us off on that item this evening is our Associate Planner, Travis Brierly. Mr. Brierly, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, we're looking at the variance for a septic system at 6920 Foxglove Circle. This variance is a variance to the City's Code, Chapter 26, Section 26-168, which is an adoption of the county's ordinances. Specifically, what we're looking at tonight in the county's ordinance is the requirement for a 3-foot separation of periodically saturated soil. It does feel kind of weird that we're going to be talking a little bit about the county ordinance, but we have worked with county staff on putting this all together and what they need from the city to go ahead with their approvals on their end. The request that is tonight specifically is to reduce that 3-foot separation by half to 18 inches. We did have comments received before the public hearing, which were more questions of what the variance was for and what a variance is, and staff was able to answer those questions prior to the Planning Commission. We did hold a public hearing during the Planning Commission meeting on September 17th, and we did not have any comments received by the public, and it was recommended for approval, or to come to the council for approval. A background on this, as I said, is to work with Carver County. When we're looking at this, the saturated soil is the drain field for a septic system. It's where the effluent gets treated. Excuse me, I'm stopping myself. If the city council approves a variance, what will happen is that a permit can be applied for a septic system at this property, and then the county environmental services will handle all the details such as environmental impacts and controls, as well as the placement regulation and those type of things. When we talk about septic systems, as a city, we primarily have houses that have municipal services. We don't use septic systems. We have sanitary systems. So just to quickly touch on it, basically what it is on the left side of the screen is your septic tank, which separates out the solids and the liquids in the treatment, and then that gets pushed out of the septic tank and goes into what's called the drain field. And the soil that's there is what we're talking about tonight as far as the variance goes. That soil is regulated by the MPCA and is reviewed by the county to make sure it's the correct soil for treatment, so we do protect the environment. Eventually that will become groundwater again. Tonight, what we're looking at is looking at a different type of system. It's a type 4 system, which is on the left side. It's an aerobic treatment system compared to your typical mound system that you would see for a septic tank. With that, there's a pre-treatment as well as using air to agitate so that the treatment can happen faster, so you don't need as much ground and earth to treat any of the effluent that comes out. When we do look at this, we want to look at the practical difficulties, and the first thing we look at is this reasonable? And there is no municipal services available for this property. We also have to look at that this was not caused by the property owner. The biggest thing is the natural topography of the site makes using a traditional mound system impractical. And talking with the county, doing it would take up a significant portion of the property and cause more damage to the property than if we went with a different type of system. We look at the essential character. The septic system's not going to be visible from adjacent properties, and as well as the adjacent properties on the street have their own septic systems. The future steps, if the city council approves the variance tonight, we would take no further action besides confirming that the variance is recorded with the county. With that being done, an application can be provided to the county for the installation of the system. And then again, the county will take care of regulating all the requirements as part of the application, the installation, any reviews, any follow-ups, anything else that needs to be done with the septic system. Tonight, I would ask that a motion is made by the city council to approve the variance, and language has been presented on the screen in front, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brierly. Council, questions on this request?
Just one, is there currently a septic system that's on the property that's failing?
Councilmember, correct. There is a current septic system that needs to be replaced, and when that system was put in compared to, or the regulations at that point compared to the regulations they have changed, requiring a creative solution that'll still work.
So do we know if the depth of the current system is at this requested variance depth today, or
The current,
deeper, or do we know?
Councilmember, the current system that's on the site is a traditional mound system, and the system being put in is being requested to be an aerobic system, which has different regulations as far as pre-treatment as well as final treatment into the soil.
So at the time the original system was put in place, it met all the requirements, and now those requirements have changed, causing them to need this type of a system. Is that correct?
Correct, Mayor.
Very good.
Worst case scenario, what are we talking about if it fails and spews waste beyond 18 inches?
If the council member, if there's issues with the system, that's all going to be regulated by the county's environmental services, which is the expert in this matter, as well as the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency also has regulations set forth in their rules process to how these systems get put in, as well as if there is an issue of reporting, correction, and that type of stuff. Normally, any septic system installation would not come to the city or the city council for approval. That's something that would be done through a permit process directly through the county's environmental services.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, council, I will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution approving the issuance of a variance of Victoria City Code, Chapter 26, Section 26-168 for 6920 Foxglove Circle for a reduction of the minimum separation of the periodically saturated soil to be no less than 18 inches.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item is item 6.2, which is a final assessment hearing for the 2023 street and drainage improvements. Presenting that item this evening is our city engineer, Kara Guerin. Ms. Guerin, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. Tonight you have two final assessment hearings in front of you. They are two separate projects with two separate sets of hearings and two separate presentations specific to the project. And so there's folks here from both projects, I think. But what I'm going to do here first is for the presentation for the first item relating to the 2023 street improvement project, I'm going to provide some background and history for the City Council on the city's special assessment policy and process, since I am not aware that this current council has been through this, at least not recently that I can recall. So the city's street improvement program dates back to 2003. Actually, there was plenty of work prior to 2003 where the city was trying to figure out how the city was going to tackle reconstructing the old streets throughout the community. But in 2003, the city adopted the current assessment policy, which calls for a 50-50 split of the costs for street and storm sewer improvements for residential streets. So what that means is the policy dictates that 50% of the project costs for residential streets would be paid by the property owner through a special assessment. That same policy calls for up to 100% of the street and storm sewer costs for streets that are adjacent to commercial property to be assessed to the adjacent property owner. And then the policy notes that 100% of the costs for maintenance would be paid by the city. So that would be things like seal coats, crack sealing, mill and overlay projects. Under the current policy, those are paid 100% by the city. After that policy was adopted, the city in 2003 technically completed the downtown phase 1 improvement project in the core of downtown under this policy. And then in 2004 began reconstructing neighborhood streets. In 2005, the city developed a 5-year CIP that was updated annually. And here we are in 2024, and nearly all of the streets, so all of the streets you see on this graphic shown in green, all of those streets have been through a street reclaim project or a street reconstruction project with the adjacent property owners assessed for the improvements, or else the roads were constructed with development, with our new city standard that came into play in the late 90s. So the city's special assessment policy, I just have a couple of slides highlighting information about the policy. I'm going to read some of them. The purpose of this assessment policy, this language is right out of it, is to establish a fair and equitable manner of recovering and distributing the cost of public improvements. The procedures used by the City of Victoria for levying special assessments are those specified by Minnesota Statute Chapter 429, which provides that all or part of the cost of improvements may be assessed against benefiting properties. Special assessments must meet the criteria noted here. The land must receive benefit from the improvement. The amount of the assessment must not exceed the benefit. And then the assessment must be uniform in relation to the same class of property within an assessment area. So, specifically when we start to talk about what the benefit is of a project, periodically the city has conducted special benefit analysis on the city's assessment policy to check that we are conforming with state statute. So historically, 50%, as I noted, of street and storm sewer costs have been assessed for residential property to the adjacent property owners. For the downtown projects, specifically the Phase 1 improvements in 2003 and the Phase 2 improvements in 2009, those city councils decided to deviate from the 100% assessment that I noted in the policy, and they went with a 75% assessment of the project costs for the street and storm sewer to the adjacent property owners. When new sanitary sewer and water, so in neighborhoods where sewer and water was not previously available, the policy calls for 100% of those costs to be assessed, which has been implemented in practice. And then the policy provides for many different methodologies for calculating assessments, but it's been common for the city to use the unit method in residential projects. So specifically what that means is that if you have a house adjacent to an improvement project, you pay an assessment. Some communities will use a front foot method, so if you have a bigger lot, you're paying more. The city made the decision that every house in a neighborhood benefits from the street the same, so applied a uniform practice of calculating the assessments in neighborhood areas. For downtown, those Phase 1 and Phase 2 improvement projects that I spoke of, the city did use a front foot method because you had so many different sizes of lots within the existing downtown. Under the city's policy and based on the city's practice, when we're dealing with the unit method with a corner lot, you might have one street that's constructed under one improvement project and the other street constructed under another improvement project. Under the city's policy, the side where your primary driveway, whichever road your primary driveway accesses from, is the project you're going to be assessed for. There's no perfect assessment policy. It is important that assessments be implemented in a reasonable, consistent, and fair manner. Certainly, there may be exceptions to the policy or unique circumstances or situations that may require special consideration and discretion by the City Council. So that, the policy does provide for the council to consider exceptions. We do highlight the reasonable, consistent, and fair elements of this policy. That was a conversation that we undertook with the council back when we started this endeavor in 2004. We anticipated that at some point you will have reconstructed every street in the community, and treating all of the residents of the community consistently and fair through the different projects and through the different councils has been a recommendation that we've consistently had. This slide just shows the typical steps in the process, should there be questions about process, but where we are for both of these projects are we're at the point where we're holding the final assessment hearing. You have a resolution in front of you tonight for consideration where you would approve the final assessments, and then the assessments become due and are either paid or added to the applicable property taxes. So I did want to just, for the benefit of the council, highlight some of the historical assessments that have been paid. This slide is not in your packet. I don't expect you to read from it. But I did want to highlight a couple of projects relative to the hearings that you're holding tonight. So what you're seeing here is every project that the city has completed since adoption of the policy in 2003, 2004, what the type of project the project was, and then what the assessment amounts were paid by the citizens of Victoria. Every item you see here is on a unit basis unless it's otherwise noted. I did want to just highlight a couple of projects relative to the projects in front of you tonight. Specifically, so the 2023 street improvement project, and we'll talk about those assessments in detail a little bit more, but projects that were similar in nature in terms of what the conditions were like. So when we're talking about a full reconstruction project, we're talking about a road that didn't have curb and gutter previously. It probably was built many, many years ago and required a full reconstruction with a new sand section, drain tile, new curb and gutter, and a new pavement system. These fully reconstructed roads are getting what we refer to as our 50-year design, where we're putting in the full sand section, and the intent is to not have to go through this full reconstruction process for 50 years. After 20 years, the road would get a mill and overlay. Hopefully in year 40, you could do another mill and overlay before you'd be faced with doing a full reconstruction. So relative to the 2023 street project, some projects that were similar. So the 2008 street project included the Victoria Circle neighborhood, which is just down the hill from these folks. Those assessments back in 2008 for those streets, based on the 50% assessment rate, were just shy of $9,000. Another one I want to highlight is the 2009 street project. That was the Lions Park neighborhood. So all of the streets south of Highway 5 and east of County Road 11 in the older part of the community that have somewhat of a similar type of density. Those assessments were $8,716. The Heartwood neighborhood was $9,899. And I won't go into too many more of them, except for the 2010 street project. That actually included extension of new city water, but the portion of the assessments for streets only was $11,400. So those are just some examples compared to the current project that that might be similar in nature. Specifically to the Steiger Lake Lane assessments tonight, some projects that were similar to those would have been, it's pretty interesting when you start to look at the downtown projects. So back in 2003, where we were assessing 75% of the street and storm sewer costs, we had one property owner, as an example, had a $31,000 assessment. That was a restaurant. And then we had another property that had improvements around all sides of it, and that one had a $99,000 assessment that business owner paid. In the 2009 downtown project, those assessments ranged from about $20,000 to $83,000 per property. A couple I would maybe highlight there is that, as an example, the bank property, their assessment was $50,000. And then the Hartman building that includes the ice cream parlor, their assessment was $29,000 back in 2009. Those projects were completed. So that's just some background. Then I'm going to pivot specifically to the 2023 street and drainage improvement proposed assessments. So per the policy, we're talking about assessing for the street and storm sewer costs. There was water improvements and sanitary sewer improvements included in the project. We're not proposing to assess for those because those facilities already existed. So repairs that we completed to those facilities are funded using sewer and water bills that are paid by the community. So back at the time that the city had the public improvement hearing, the city council, when we were doing the feasibility study, made the decision to reduce the amount that was being assessed to the property owners from 50% down to 30%. So this was, back in 2022 now. So the proposed assessment for the residential side is $9,110 per unit based on a 30% assessment amount. If it had been 50%, as the other projects that predated this one occurred, those assessments would have been $15,180. So we previously, back when we started this endeavor, opted to reduce them from the $15,180 down to $9,110. You'll recall there was a bullet about different class of properties being grouped together. The commercial properties located within this project area had their assessments calculated separately from the residential property. Their proposed assessments are $11,550 per unit. If we would have assessed 75% of the project costs, as had been done in the other two downtown projects, those assessments would have came out to about $29,000 per unit. So we are seeing a pretty significant reduction in what we're proposing there. Under the city's policy, these assessments would be levied over 15 years if added to the taxes. And the city does charge interest on that, and the interest rate for this proposed project is 5.7%. These are the properties that are included within the assessment area. The ones highlighted in this blue outline here are the commercial properties. The remaining properties are residential. These two properties highlighted in green are not included in the assessment because they have a primary driveway located on 81st Street, which we covered this distinction about the driveway location previously. The city's policy and state statute does allow for application for deferments for special assessments. The information about that process were included in the notice that was provided to the residents in the mail and published in the paper. As of the time of this meeting, the city has received one request from a deferment, that if the resolution is approved tonight, that individual would be working with the city clerk for that deferment process. So with that, the city, this is a final assessment hearing, so I would recommend holding the final assessment hearing, and folks in the audience would have an opportunity to speak to the council, and then certainly with that, I'd happily take questions as well.
All right, thank you, Ms. Garrett. And so just to clarify, this hearing is for the properties along Rose Street. What are the names of the other roads? Sunflower?
Rose, Sunflower, Trillium Trail, and 80th Street.
Okay, so that's the first public hearing is for those. The things along Steiger Lake Lane, we will hear in the second public hearing. So with that, I will open the public hearing. So if you would like to address the council on if your property is on Rose, Sunflower, 81st, and Trillium, please have the first person approach the podium, please. Thank you so much. Welcome. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is David Lura, and I have a lot on 8090 Trillium Trail. Question: do all streets that get repaved, do they get assessed?
Ms. Guerin, please take that.
Sure. Mayor, members of the audience, so any street under the city's current policy, any street that is reconstructed or has a significant improvement to it, the city's policy would call for the city council to consider special assessments. Alternatively, like the mill and overlay project that was completed this summer to 81st Street, which is adjacent to this project area, that type of improvement is not assessed under the current city policy.
So what about other neighborhoods that just get, there's no storm or sewer or street and storm? I think like Watermark got a repavement.
Yeah, so that would be a mill and overlay, and under the city's policy, those projects are not assessed.
Okay.
But
so what was Trillium Trail? What was done there?
So Trillium Trail did receive an improvement as part of the project area. This Trillium Trail is a little bit of a strange roadway because it's an alley that provides primary access to some individual homes. A number of years ago, the Public Works Department had come in and just completed some paving to that roadway. So with the proposed improvements, we did improve the corridor to be consistent with the other streets. We did not elect to put the sand section underneath that road in order to, it just is too narrow. It's relatively narrow. And if we would have came in and wanted to put that 2-foot sand section in that we put in under other roads, it would have been very impactful to the neighbors.
And so it differs from, let's say, the Watermark house?
Yes. Yeah. We did more extensive improvements than what we did there. And I can come back to it.
Say that again, Dana, or I'm sorry.
We did more to Trillium Trail than the basic mill and overlay, but I will pull up the plans if the council has additional questions.
Yes, please.
After you've gone through the hearing.
I for sure do. I'm just curious. The only thing I just want fair assessments, right? If other areas are being assessed for similar jobs or not being assessed for similar jobs, I think it should be considered the same across everybody. For instance, if Trillium was only repaved, I was taxed equally amount, or not, I was assessed equally amount compared to everybody else, and they got additional work done. And so I find that a little bit just hard to swallow, I guess.
Okay, understood. Ms. Guerin, can you answer that?
Yeah, it'll take me a little to pull up that detailed info, so
very good.
You can come back to me.
Yeah, can we come back to that?
Yes,
why don't you go ahead and take a seat, and if anybody else would like to address the council in this public hearing, please approach the podium. Hello, welcome. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Ron Larson, 1800 81st Street. We are on the corner lot of 81st and Rose.
Kim Larson.
Okay, very good. And go ahead and make your comments.
I had a question about your presentation, Kara.
Okay.
When you talked about all those assessments prior, were they all financed with a bond? And if so, was that bond interest rate passed on to those residents?
Okay, Karen, Miss Karen, please.
I'd have to check with the finance director to see if all of them, in fact, were financed with bonds, but historically, typically, the city has used bonds for completing the improvements, and all of them, I can look to see if I have a history of the assess or interest rates. But it does look like, I could go through them one by one. Many were over 6% in the early years before the recession.
The bond was, and then you elected to do the extra 2%?
Yeah.
Administration fee?
Yeah, the 2% over the bond rate has been part of the city's policy since it was adopted. And so the interest rates that were applied on those assessments appear to have been above 6% for a number of years. Then we had a couple in the 5% range. And then in more recent years, when overall interest rates were dropping, the lowest interest rate appears to have been back in 2016 for a project where those folks had a 3.8% interest rate. But yeah, it does look like bonds were issued for all of these, based on the notes I have from the finance director.
Thank you.
One other question, because I printed this off from the city's website, and it went through and listed all the addresses, whether they were commercial or residential, and then the rate, the assessment by unit.
And it's the final assessment rule.
That's what it says here. And it lists Holiday Station store as residential. Can you explain
And
that to me?
on the map, it's not circled, and they have a large curbing along there.
I don't think that's
Consistent.
with the businesses
Right,
that are
so-
also in that area.
Miss Karen, can you address that, please?
Yeah, so specifically the portion of land owned by Holiday is only this parcel at 8057, which is a residential parcel. Their main parcel is not included in the assessment because they aren't accessing any of the improvements. Their access comes from Highway 5. They don't have access from Rose Street, and they aren't connected to 80th Street. But this residential property that they own, but it is a resident, currently it's vacant, but it would be considered residential.
Isn't that considered a partial lot because the car wash is, if you
Car
look at
wash is
easement,
part of
the easement wouldn't allow
that.
for that property to be considered residential. There isn't clearance.
Yeah, that was the finding in the feasibility report.
Okay.
Well, we were here when that was put in, and we knew the people that their house was taken from them for that. So I don't agree with that. They wouldn't have a car wash if they didn't have
Yeah,
that
due to the setback.
property.
Right. That's why that was done. Was
Understanding we understand what you guys are proposing here, so
I just don't think it's fair for the other
commercial
businesses.
properties. That
understood, yeah.
I think that needs to be relooked at.
Thank you, yeah. Any other comments?
Oh, yeah.
Well, one of the things we're looking at as well, and I know you've talked about different bond rates, is the city council has the option to not add that 2%, which then brings that to that 3.7 if that's your bond rate. And that significantly changes the impact of interest that we look at, when we looked at this amortization, we are going to be paying, just as a resident, over $13,000 for this, to the benefit of a collector street. Sunflower is a street that accesses the highway where there is significant traffic going through there. For neighborhoods west of us in the collector area, increasing, correct, traffic as well as speed. And we have substantial speed and disregard completely of the stop sign at Sunflower and 81st Street, observed regularly. There's been conversation regarding with some of our neighbors about putting even a stop sign, which is common through other areas in Victoria, Narcissus, down in Deer Run. Where in the middle of a block there would be a stop sign, where their stop signs would be put at Rose and 81st to slow traffic. So when we look at this and we look at this assessment, and it's $13,860.81 for a resident. That is significant when you look at that interest amount that we'll be paying, as well as what we now have to put away when we look at the increase of regular payments due of $900 and almost $20 towards our escrow. So we look at our property tax, and then we look at the property tax increase. And one of the things that was directed to us as far as information was, well, you have property taxes, we're going to add the special assessment, and those extra 2% is for tracking and maintenance when it becomes part of our regular property bill, which would become part of a regular administrative process where you don't need to collect that significant amount. This interest, if we were to say we agree to the 9110, as we look at our city, we look at our community, and we look at improvements, but then we look at that and we say, how can you continue to collect that much money from the residents and the residential area as well as the business owners when they have even a more significant commercial cost, and you add that 2%? And I'm looking at the interest rate nearly doubling in what I'm going to pay over the life of that term. So as a council, you have a decision if you could say, we'll pay, and we can pay and cover that bond, but you have a choice to remove that extra 2%. So I would ask respectfully if you could consider that as your counsel.
Thank you. Okay. Noted. All right.
You have other comments?
Anything else? Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Larson. Thank you. This is a public hearing, so if you have any other additional comments, please step forward. Any additional comments on this project? Last call. All right. Thank you very much. With that, council, I will entertain a motion to close the public
Did
hearing.
Kara find the answer to the
first?
Okay. You know what? Can we go ahead and close the public hearing, and then we'll have,
but he might have questions
Okay.
based off of.
very good. Tell us what you've learned.
Sure, I did pull the actual construction plans to jog my brain, and Trillium Trail was reclaimed. So that is considered a more significant improvement than just a mill and overlay. So that's when we go up and we grind up the pavement that's there, and then we put down a new surface, which is similar to what we've completed to other projects.
Okay. Mr. Laurent, do you have any other questions on that?
Yeah.
Can you step forward and so we can capture this in the microphone? Thank you.
And so that's different. So when you resurface other areas, how does that removed?
So when we complete, projects like Watermark, projects like 81st Street that was conducted this summer, all we do is remove the top layer of asphalt and put in a new layer of asphalt over the top of it. So it's just a minor resurfacing.
And then Trillium was completely dug up, is that what you're saying?
It's a process where we grind up the existing material and base to create a new roadway base and then pave a new full set of asphalt over the top of it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. All right. That being said, I will now take a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing?
Thank you, Councilmember Reif. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Gunderson. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Council, I will now open the floor for council discussion. Comments, questions?
Mayor?
Yes.
Can I just
Yes,
weigh in?
Attorney
Two
Bose,
legal
please.
things kind of jumped out at me there that might be helpful to stir some conversation. The first is the last point that you were just talking about, which is this distinction between projects that are simply full reconstruction, I guess, is one thing, but what's the term that you use, Care, for less than full reconstruction?
Mill and overlay?
Mill and overlay or
There's
something.
reclaim,
or a
there's
reclaim, so-
reclamation project, which is under the city's policy considered an improvement project versus a mill and overlay project, which under the city's policy is maintenance.
Yeah, so Mayor and Council, just to state maybe the obvious, the reason the city and this city, and I think most cities, would not assess for mill and overlay projects or the like is that those are really maintenance projects, right? You're not widening, changing the grade of, changing the alignment of, adding facilities to storm sewer or whatever. You're just returning the road to its prior condition. And so that most cities would conclude adds very little or no benefit to the abutting properties, no increase in value because you've not changed the improvement that's abutting their property. And so that's not assessable because remember, again, one of the two tests is in order to assess, you have to have given some special benefit to the abutting properties. You have to have added some improvement to the abutting property. So just make that point about that distinction between projects that get assessed and projects that don't get assessed. And then the other point is that you heard from Kara correctly that the other test, the other prong, in my view, there's really two. It's talked about as three, but there's really two. The other is that assessments need to be uniform as to the same class of property. To be clear, again, I think you know this, but let's say it out loud. To be clear, you're talking about it has to be uniform within a given project. It doesn't have to be legally uniform between projects. Between 2003's project, the assessment policy of the city doesn't have to remain the same today in 2024. That's not the uniformity that's required. And in fact, you have, as we learned tonight, you have changed your policy. You now assess less of the total project cost to your residents than you did originally. You used to assess 75%, now you're down to 50%. That change is obviously, it's not uniform between 2003 and today, but that kind of uniformity is not required. You were able to make that change, and that's perfectly appropriate.
And when we opted to assess not the 50% according to our policy on this project, but rather 30%, that's at our discretion as well. And we made that observation to go from 50 to 30% based on some information that we had at that point in time. So, and that is okay as well. As long as we...
Mayor, you heard from one of your residents tonight sort of making the argument, which is a policy argument, that you ought to try to treat current projects as similar as you can to prior projects. That's a totally appropriate policy argument. It's just not a legal argument. There's no legal requirement that you do that as a matter of policy. That's why you're here. So it's an appropriate policy argument, but it's not a legal argument.
Understood. Thank you.
Can I ask him a
Yeah,
question?
Councilmember Roberts, please.
And I assume there's no, right, like we obviously have split up commercial versus residential, but as we've heard, one of these is an empty lot as well, since they're still getting a potential benefit to, if they sell it someday, like is there a distinction there that we could make, say, I mean, it's an empty lot, should that be a less of an assessment type thing?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, legally, the cap, the limit on what you can assess, again, is the special benefit to the property, the increase in value to the property. That is frankly, a question that's a bit of art and a bit of science, right? And so to the extent you find that compelling that it's not developed at this point and thus may not enjoy the same benefit, that's something you can consider for sure.
So question on, kind of following up on that holiday property, is there any recollection as to why that wasn't rezoned a commercial property once it was captured for that car wash?
Mayor, that's not something we've specifically researched, so we would need direction if that's something the council wants more information on. We would go back to the records to see what we can find.
Very good, thank you. I think I would be curious about that because I don't believe that to be an appropriate residential lot, even though Holiday owns it and it's zoned residential. I think we should change the zoning on that to be a commercial property, if in fact that is what is going on there.
So just to clarify, are you suggesting, Mayor, that that property should be assessed based on the commercial assessment rate?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
What do we, just a quick question, do we know if the county is assessing that as a residential parcel or a commercial parcel?
You don't magically happen to know what it's zoned sitting there. We can see what we can figure out while you're talking.
Do we know if there are actual improvements on the parcel, or is it just a completely vacant parcel that's sitting there unimproved?
Based on the aerial, to the extent that's accurate, which I typically advise us to not follow, it does look like part of the car wash is on that property. But that, we would go back to the address file and pull the records for Holiday.
I think that's worthy of a second look.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate on this one.
Councilmember Gunderson, please.
So let's say Holiday decides that they're going to incorporate it into their lot as a commercial, that their commercial lot's already not being assessed. We would lose that assessment value from 8057 if they incorporated it into 1793, which is what I would guess they would do from a business standpoint, which would cause us to lose money and have to the remaining neighbors would have to reabsorb that money. Because then they would say, well, if you're saying there's no access to the business from any of these roads, except our access is on 5. From a legal standpoint, then that becomes commercial and we lose out on the 8057 assessment value. So I'm hesitant to force Holiday into doing something or having us look into something when they'll come back and say, okay, if you're calling it commercial, we're commercial, we have no access off 5, thus putting a bigger burden on residents that are already there based on the value of the project versus what we have to pay for. So unfortunately, the money's got to come from somewhere, and to get something out of a commercial business that's currently there, I think that's the argument that would be made, and I think that's the argument that we would lose.
But I think the counterpoint to that, Councilmember Gunderson, is that at present, then, in order for that to really match your argument, then there would need to be legal paperwork filed with the county to incorporate that parcel to enjoin it and create a larger parcel that would then be commercial. We have an assessment based on the parcels as they exist today with the property ID numbers before us. And I think that the question is that they are legally separate parcels. So I think the question before us is, how do we treat those legally separated parcels? Is it a residential parcel? Is it a commercial parcel? I think that there's certainly some question at this point, and one thing you may want to consider is, do we table this to date certain so that staff can research this item to come up with these answers before we make this final assessment roll? It's an idea I'll put out there for us to consider.
So Mayor, we did pull up the zoning, and it is zoned residential. It's zoned R1 today.
Is it a buildable lot?
It's an existing lot of record, meaning that it could have a home constructed on it.
And can you tell from what you're seeing, does it include part of the car wash?
But as Kara mentioned, we can speculate based on aerial imagery. Usually those are off by a few feet because of elevation contours, but based on the image provided, yes, it does appear so.
So my other question, kind of based off of what Greg and Derek are saying, is, like, can you ethically also say, well, we want to get more out of Holiday, can we now change this to commercial and then assess it, right? Like, we're doing it kind of after we've already talked about what they're going to do, right? Like, it doesn't seem, I'm not saying that we shouldn't necessarily do it, but I'm just wondering from an ethical and a legal standpoint, like, can we say now, well, it is residential, but we're going to up it to commercial so now we can get more money out of you?
Attorney Bose, do you have any opinion about that?
Well, I don't have any concrete legal advice, but it won't stop me from giving you my thoughts. If 8057, I guess I agree with Councilmember Gunderson. If 8057 was zoned commercial and owned by Holiday, I think it would be part of Holiday's property. And if that were the case, I think Kara would say, but I'll let Kara say it if it's true, it would not have been proposed to be assessed, right? It's not as if the staff would have proposed assessing part of Holiday's property if Holiday had one large commercial property there that didn't take access off of the roads that are being improved. So, but I guess I'll let Kara say that if that's true or not, but that's my takeaway.
Yeah, it's always a little difficult to try to speculate how we would have developed the feasibility study with a different set of facts than the facts we had in front of us. Typically I would turn to the planning staff when there's a vacant lot and find out what it was zoned and what potential there was for improvement on it. Brian noting here and confirming it in our GIS data that it was zoned residential would cause me to conclude that that's why I would have recommended it to be treated as a residential property. I would concur with Bob, had it been just part of Holiday, under the policy without it having access to Rose Street, I wouldn't have included it in the assessment if it was contiguous to the rest of the property and not splittable. Sometimes if you have a lot that could potentially be split, under the current ordinance, sometimes we'll look at whether that property should be assessed under the policy, but if it was connected and had a car wash on half of it, it probably would have been removed. But that feasibility gets presented to the city council for review and approval, and then we have a public improvement hearing where they would have been notified of that at the time too.
Is there a reason why it wouldn't have, when this was built, why that wouldn't have been changed to that might be a bigger issue for another time, but I'm just curious, what happened there that it didn't get?
Yeah. That's the part we'd have to go to the address file in the council records to see what the history was there.
Yeah, and so I think for the purposes this evening, to me, I think because it's zoned that way, that's where it is. We assess them as a residential property and then consider if that really is truly a commercial property that we need to change that parcel into in our zoning code.
But that's not for zoning code maybe, but would it be the owner of the parcel that needs to have it actually applied for to be rezoned or be reclassified? So is 8057 do they need to apply to make it a part of their?
Brian is nodding his head.
Yes, so the applicant.
So we can't just do it.
We can't just do it. The applicant needs to do that. Yeah. So the argument is going to be, if we table it and allow them to go through this process, we lose out on 8057 because that would then become part of 1793 as a full commercial lot, and whatever property they own up to the property line of 8099 is gone. The benefit of 8057 is gone, has become part of the commercial lot. So as of right now, 8057 is owned as a residential empty lot owned by Holiday that is accessible.
So it's better to get something than nothing.
Something than nothing right now at this point. Okay. And I can't speak to why, again, like anybody on here, I don't know. Holiday's been there since I've been here. Yeah. So I can't tell you why it's been there, why they did what they did. When Holiday came in to build, with whatever their adjacent partner was. But right now, if we don't kick that can down the road, 8057 is going to get absorbed into every other residential property in that area to cover the full cost of the construction. So, what battles do we want to fight?
I think we have to keep it the way it is, so we get the
I agree.
assessment.
To Kara's point, when you do the feasibility study, you do it based on the information you have at the time you've got it. So that's that. Council. So I think we've solved that. Other questions, comments?
I just have some quite more questions about Trillium, right? That's what 8090 is on, correct? So it sounds like it's kind of an in-between, right? So the other streets, this happened a while ago, so right, they had full curb and gutter, right? Like we did full, not reconstruct, yeah, right, reconstruct. So, so is there thought? So again, does that doesn't factor in necessarily to what we determined it, right? Like one is getting, right, a higher level of what, we're giving them, and versus this one, because it's a narrow, more of an alley, we couldn't really do curb and gutter, right? So we just did kind of the in-between, not just a mill and overlay. Like how does, I guess, is that not a factor into figuring out what assessment should be?
So historically, we've treated neighborhoods as neighborhoods and include all of the properties as a project together instead of parsing them out street by street. So, certainly if the council wanted us to apply a different methodology for the lots that access Trillium Trail, they also get access to their homes from the public streets that tie into the location. It's a little odd for 42, 56, 72, and 98. So the council would need to say who's splitting it. If you wanted me to go through and separate out only the costs for Trillium Trail, how are these folks being assessed? Are they paying an assessment over here and then part of the assessment over here, or are just these three properties sharing in the cost of Trillium Trail? Those types of things are some of the thinking we go through when we develop a feasibility study and look at how to split these costs off. Historically, we've tried to treat neighborhoods as neighborhoods together, and they get to experience the joys of going through the special assessment process together. But certainly the council could provide some different direction.
Understood.
Yeah.
All right. I think the methodology used seems to be the most fair and equitable way to do a neighborhood as a neighborhood. Council, other thoughts, questions?
I'm just trying to remember back to the conversations we had. Was it March when we talked about this?
The public improvement hearing would have been actually December of 2022.
Okay. Yeah, because at the same time I had a conversation. Owners of 80, that 8,000. I'm blind. Sorry. Is that 8,000?
Yeah.
The owners
the
of
two parcels at 8,000.
The two parcels at 8,000. Having spoken with them, they were, I believe, at that meeting to discuss the 50% levy. And I think at that time when we had the conversations about it, we did have reservations about 50%, and we did drop it to 30% because we felt that putting 50% on this particular neighborhood was adverse than any other neighborhoods that we left it at 50% because of the size and the limited number of residents in this area. And having conversation, and I know those owners very well. They live right next door to me. They seem to find out that was reasonable. So our 30%, we arrived at 30%, not just picking a number at random. We talked with owners and residents in this area at the December meeting. So I just want to put it out there that we do take into account size and number of residents and things when we're trying to make a policy for an equitable project that's going to serve not only the residents in the area but also the community at large. I'm comfortable with where we're at because we have talked about this at length with owners, and it does serve the community, will serve the property values well, and I think, and I understand that you're not going to see it immediately, but I think you will see it in the future.
Any other comments?
Just a clarification
Councilmember Rice.
from my standpoint. So the change we made back in 22, 50% to 30% residential, 75 to 50% commercial.
30, 75 to 30% for the commercial.
Or 75 to 30.
And that was just on this project. That wasn't, we didn't change our policy. We made an exception for this project.
This is, yes.
Yes. All right. Anything else? All right. I do want to address the 2% optional fee that you had mentioned. Yeah, I hear you. I understand what you're saying there. That's been our policy. We've applied that policy equally on all of our assessments. Yeah. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I just want to note that our Assistant City Manager and Finance Director is watching us this evening from home, and she just wanted us to note that we do pay closing costs on the bonds, and then we keep our own records and we certify the special assessments to the city. So there's a cost that the county charges to the city for that every year, and that 2% takes that administrative work into consideration.
Very good, thank you. All right, any other questions, comments from council? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve a resolution adopting the final assessment roll for the 2023 street and drainage improvements.
Thank you, Councilmember Roberts. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item, item 6.3, which is the overview of the final assessment hearing for the Steiger Lake Lane West Phase 1 improvements. Presenting on that item again is our city engineer, Kara Guerin. Ms. Guerin, back to you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. The next final assessment hearing you have before you tonight is for the Steiger Lake Lane improvements. Those are improvements that occurred to Steiger Lake Lane within the area highlighted here on this map. That is not an aerial, so just to orient you, the improvements extended from the end of the bridge, so the bridge off of Steiger Lake Lane in downtown over to towards Highway 5. There's a portion of the improvements that were completed on just a temporary basis because of the Marco McLean project that we talked about as part of the Highway 5 update. That roadway is going to continue to be improved as part of improvements for that project. But so the segment of road that was improved, now that project, originally that road was a 2-lane roadway without curb and gutter. So with the improvements, we did reconstruct the roadway with the 2-foot sand section. We added drain tile, storm sewer, and curb and gutter. In addition, the roadway includes parking along the north side of the road and then streetscape features and sidewalk along the north side of the road. This project overall, and I scribbled down this on a sheet of paper, this is in the project or in the notice and in the council packet. Overall, the project was about a $2.46 million project. So there certainly was a lot more work involved in the project than just the street and storm sewer improvements. Specifically, we did a lot of replacement of utilities, so sanitary sewer and water. And then in addition, included that streetscape package of parking, sidewalk along the north side of the road, pavers, lighting, landscaping, a lot more involved in it. But that being said, we still needed to apply the city's assessment policy because the road was reconstructed. So similarly, we also took a look at, so under the city's policy, you know, these properties adjacent to this improvement are a little bit unique because you have 2 residential properties and then you have a commercial property on the south side of the road, and then the north side of the road you have Park District property. So it isn't commercial, it isn't residential, it's a little bit of a combination of both. So certainly the 75% approach didn't seem appropriate. So what staff ended up doing was taking a look at the Steiger Lake Lane East project that was completed in 2018. So we reconstructed Steiger Lake Lane from City Hall here out to about to Enke. And at that time, we really looked at that 75% assessment for commercial. We had the Kelly Green property next to us. We had the building that is now the vet clinic. Both of those were commercial. They're a little bit narrower. They're a little bit unique from some of the other projects. So as part of that, we actually did go through special benefit analysis where we worked with an outside consultant to help us determine what would be appropriate assessments for the type of improvement that's being completed here. And the assessments that were adopted for that project, specifically I'll note 2 of the parcels that are commercial in nature. One of them was $39,000. Under the old policy, that assessment would have been $85,000. So, the city council at that time concluded the 75% wasn't appropriate, and they opted to assess $39,000 for one of the properties. The current property that has the new vet clinic on it, they only paid half an assessment because the project stopped halfway through their property, so theirs was limited to $16,000. So when we took a look at the feasibility study for this project, we took a look at a couple of other precedent examples. So this Steiger Lake Lane project was one of the examples that we looked at. And then we actually also looked at the 78th and Cochea project. Those roads were reconstructed. They serve, they're collector roads. They serve a greater land area. And their assessments, back when we did that project I have to find my notes that I made very big so I could read them. The 78th and Cochea project was in 2016, and the residential assessments on that project were $10,560. So when we prepared the feasibility study, we took a look at those representative examples, and what you see here on the screen is what was in the feasibility report, what was shared at the public improvement hearing, and what we're recommending for assessments on this project. As the council's aware, we've discussed it previously with the city council. You'll see that the Three Rivers Park District parcels are not being shown. They are struck through because we haven't been able to demonstrate that we can show benefit for the parkland in this location. There's no program park space. There's steep slopes. It's not accessible land that the park uses. It's really nature preserve type property. So, typically on a project where we would have encountered that previously, the city would pick up the additional project costs for assessments for that type of land. In this particular case, the city is covering the balance of the project costs outside of the $60,000 that's proposed to be assessed here. So these assessments amount to like 2% of the total project cost. So we aren't even operating in the realm of 50% or any of those factors. We really did recommend capping these assessments based on the work that was done on Steiger Lake Lane, and really to treat these folks more fair and equitably to the other properties within the city that are similar in nature that have been assessed for improvements. Same as was discussed with the last project, these assessments would be levied over 15 years with an interest rate of 5.7%. The council set that when you approved the resolution authorizing the public hearing here tonight. Deferment of special assessments also applies. The city council has not received any letters requesting deferment on this one. The city has received 2 letters objecting to the assessment amounts, and those have been shared with the city council. Those were from 2 of the parcels that are proposed to be assessed for the project. And again, you need to hold a public hearing, and happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Kara. Any questions for Kara before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, I will now open the public hearing. If you would like to address the council on this item, please approach the podium and state your name and record, or your name and address for the record, please.
Certainly. My name is Rich Schmidt. I reside at 1865 Stagger Lake Lane. I'm going to read off a piece of paper if you don't mind,
No, please.
because the uniqueness of this situation. We've lived there for 28 years. I've worked in the excavation and utility business for 35 plus years. I have little experience with street reconstruct projects, and I'm here tonight to publicly explain why my wife and I object and have submitted such to the city. Why the proposed property assessments for Stagger Lake Lane are not going to happen, as far as I'm concerned. This project does not provide our property, or as far as I can determine, our neighbor's property with any special benefits as defined in the document that the city provided. I did a quick review of the construction documents and how they relate to the present conditions of Stagger Lake Lane and what, if any, benefits it brings to our property. First, there's the tax money that we paid for 17 trees that are no longer in the designed concrete area, but are planted in the woods. Not a real good spending of taxpayer money as far as I'm concerned. And certainly no benefit to us because we have plenty of trees. We don't care. Second, more on-street parking. We have plenty of parking at our place. We can fit 7 cars in there comfortably. Don't need it. In past years, I would argue that during car shows, our yard supplied more parking spaces than does your new design. Third, new utility services. We don't benefit from those. We have a well, don't need any water. We used to have a sanitary manhole that the city had no idea about, so we didn't need a sanitary sewer service either. And we certainly didn't need the stubs brought into our property well off the right-of-way easement. Fourth, a new lawn. What a joke. When was the public meeting on this one? You guys remember? 2021, bid in 2022, June. Supposed to be substantially complete October of 2022. What year is it? I sat for over a year with black dirt or weeds as a yard. I was supposed to get sod. I called Kara, I said, don't bother with sod, that's stupid, that's a waste of taxpayer money. Just put some hydro seeding down. I'll take care of it from there. Lo and behold, I come home one day, I got an erosion blanket on my side slope. You ever try mowing a yard with erosion blanket on it? Anybody? So now I can weed whip the whole thing on a side slope. So no, that doesn't do me any good either. And then somebody should take a look at section 3292 under execution, paragraph 7 of your manual. Overseeding, maintenance, never seen a water truck, no overseeding. Congratulations, well done. Number 5, new street lights. We had lights, we have electricity. Our house lights work fine as far as I know, so didn't need those either. Even if I did, guess what? They don't work. You forgot to put the power in when you were doing the job. So remember that nice side slope with the erosion blanket on it? They had to come in and do a directional bore across my street and wreck my erosion blanket. Congratulations. So, special benefits, Mr. City Attorney, Ms. Kara, there are none. I'm going to get off the topic of special improvements, and I'm going to talk about detriments, safety concerns. Let's talk about that for a moment. Anyone drive in from the west end of town onto Stagger Lake Lane? Did they notice that the drive lane went from 7.5 to 9 feet with J barriers on one side? Let's put that into perspective. It went from 11 and a half to 9 feet. That's like driving into a typical parking stall at the shopping center at 25 miles an hour. Good luck. No signage, warning of restricted drive lanes, no signage on top of the J barriers, both of which should be applied, and I know that some of the signage is in your plan set, not there. Detriment number 2, perhaps you can go look at your signage. When you're heading westbound, tell me if you see a speed limit sign, because I don't and nobody else does, and it's rather apparent. No striping. I don't understand why it's taken 3 years to put in a job that's supposed to take 4 months. And I know it should have. Kara does too. It's right in her project manual book. 4 months to substantial completion. There's no parking signs. So occasionally you'll have people park in the new parallel spots and on the other side of the road, which then restricts your drive lanes down to 11 and a half feet. Both directions have to use that 11 and a half feet. Go figure. Well, we've talked enough about the traveling public. How about the walking public? How about those using the sidewalk? How about the little kids that walk down the sidewalk, jump on top of the retaining wall that's greater than 4 feet without fall protection? It's in your project manual. Open it up. Not even going to cover the Gregory's driveway. 14% incline. I dare any of you to jump in a wheelchair and go navigate that driveway at 14%. Sorry that you had to sit here and listen to somebody else gripe, but it's been 543 days since the start of this project to tonight, and it's still not done. Drive west out of here tonight. 2 blocks away for you guys. West. I dare you. Take a look at the crap sitting around. Take a look at the traffic control, the erosion logs, the silt fence, the construction equipment on an filtration basin that's not even close to being done. And then tell me that I'm going to pay an assessment? Are you nuts? For what? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Please.
Oh, sure, why not?
Yeah.
I'm Sue Schramm. Tony and I own the building at 1889 Stagger Lake Lane. And so...
Sue, would you bring your microphone down a little bit so we can hear you? Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, did you hear what I said?
Yes.
We're good?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, as Rich said, the project lasted way, way, way too long. We have tenants in our building. We have All Power Sports. They thrive on the public coming to them. Jim Hughes, who owned All Power Sports and now has died, told me they lost half their revenue the last summer, not this summer, the summer before, due to this construction project. And it was a terrible event. One day the sign was come in this way, one way it was the west side. And nobody ever knew until you got there. It was awful. So that's one issue. Another issue is that, again, I don't know that how this benefits our property. Our building doesn't look at that road. We have adequate parking in our parking lot. When we built our building, we abided by all the city rules to have adequate parking, and we have that. And what do we need parking up on that road for? We were also told when this began that really it was not about us. It was about the new Krause-Anderson project that was going out by the Dairy Queen. And that's why this road needed to be there, to accommodate that. So I don't know where Carl Anderson is, but obviously if Carl Anderson, if we had to do this to help them, then maybe they should be part of this billing process. The last item is that I'd like to cite the precedent that Marsh Lake Road was owned on one side by Laketown Township, the other side by Victoria, when that road was done, because they could not charge Laketown Township. Marsh Lake Road did not pay for assessments. Now, I heard it from the attorney, I heard it from Kara, that an area of improvement should be treated equally. Well, again, the park is sitting there with no assessment, but yet we are. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schramm. Anyone else would like to address the, yeah. Bob, can you move the microphone over so Mr. Gregory can? Oh, perfect. All right. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, Mayor. Good afternoon. Tom Gregory, 1885 Steiger Lake Lane. My neighbors did such a good job. I hope I can. But anyways, start off with a couple of numbers. So if I want to build a wheelchair ramp in Victoria, by your ordinance, and actually nationwide ordinance, I could not exceed 8% slope. If I want to build a home in Victoria, my driveway could not exceed 12% slope. And my driveway now, thanks to you folks, has a 14% slope. It used to have a 2% slope, which was very convenient for the wheelchair. It's all part of the whole plan when I built that house, was to make it as wheelchair accessible as possible. You folks kind of threw a wrench into that. So why do you think you have an ordinance against steep driveways? I think everybody in Minnesota knows that a steep driveway is a bad thing. They're bad for cars, trucks, trailers. You back your car out, your bumper bottoms out, the trailer hitches tear up the road. Backing out a trailer is going to tear up the road. That's why you have ordinance. They're bad for emergency vehicles, fire engines, ambulances, emergency personnel. Creates problems for all of those folks. That's why you have an ordinance against a steep driveway. I don't think there's any question that what you did to my property devalued the property. And here we're talking about how you improved our property. I don't think there's any question you devalued my property. And let's talk about how we got here, which was ages ago. Prior to any construction, you hired Kara Guerin's engineering firm to work with the homeowners and inform them how this property, how this project was going to impact their properties. During that sit-down meeting with Kara's engineer, Teresa asked a very specific question. Is the new road going to be higher or lower than the existing road? He didn't hesitate. He didn't say, I'm not sure. He said, the new curb will be about even with your driveway, will be about level with your existing driveway, the top of the new curb, which means the road itself will be about 4 to 6 inches lower. Thank you. The road itself will be about 4 to 6 inches lower than it is now, which was fine with us. We thought that was perfectly acceptable. Now, just a little background. The reason Teresa asked that question, I knew she was going to ask it. She told me she was going to ask that question. And the reason she did was because a few years prior to our project, Kara engineered a street project, curb and gutter, on the north side of Highway 7. And after the project was done, it was argued by the Carlsons that that Kara failed to put in adequate storm drain and catch basins. And it ended up, all of the water from the whole neighborhood ended up being funneled to the Carlsons project, to their property. And they ended up spending in excess of $100,000 in landscaping to mitigate all of the runoff that was happening on their project. So that's why Teresa asked that question. She did not want to repeat that nightmare scenario that the Carlsons went through. So I know she asked that question. She told me, and she did. And of course, Kara's engineer can't remember asking that question. The more we learned about it, we discovered that you folks were working closely with Three Rivers, even though Three Rivers isn't being assessed on this project. You work closely with them, and they demanded that you gut our property. They demanded that you lower the road, and that's why you did it. When I asked Kara what public benefit we got, the whole city, what public benefit did you get by gutting our property? She talked about something about preserving trees on the park. Absolute nonsense. There is no old growth trees opposite our property, none whatsoever. Everything west of that wall, just about everything, is nothing but brush and scrub trees. So making an argument that you were trying to preserve trees, total nonsense. Truth of the matter is, you wasted tens of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money lowering that road for no reason whatsoever. There's no public benefit to lower that road, but you spent tens of thousands of dollars taking away thousands of cubic yards of dirt as opposed to just raising that retaining wall. You raised that retaining wall one course, one layer, one block, and you would have saved our property. But you didn't do that. You catered to everything the Three Rivers wanted, and you gutted our property at our expense, not Three Rivers. So you all seen the emails I wrote. I wrote several to you all. Not a single one of you bothered to reply and explain your reasoning, why you chose to do what you did. So we did. We filed a lawsuit in Carver County against the city of Victoria. We're asking that the courts force the city to do the right thing, and that's restore safe and secure access to me. I mean, you know, I talked about a steep driveway. You throw winter conditions on a steep driveway, it becomes treacherous for anybody to walk on. Cars can't get up. Bad weather conditions, I can't get up my driveway. What am I supposed to do? People slip and fall on steep driveways, end up in the emergency room with serious, serious issues, possibly life-threatening. That's what you did to our driveway. You turned it from a 2% slope to a 14% slope, which even by your own standards, it exceeds your own ordinance. So, yeah, I have enough physical problems myself that I have to deal with each and every day, challenges. I certainly didn't need you all to unnecessarily go out of your way to create a personal hardship for me. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. Any other comments? Any other people who would like to address the council on this item? Final call. Thank you. With that, I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing, please.
Motion to close.
We have a motion. Can I get a second? A second by Councilmember Reif. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Council, discussion and feedback on this item.
I mean, I guess I just would say, saying that there's no benefit there, I think is not right. I mean, it's not just about the people living there right now. You have to think about if you sold that to a family, they're more likely to buy it because there's sidewalks there now that they can actually use. There's lighting that's there, so curb and gutter is important. So I don't see that there's no benefit there.
And I understand the frustration by the length of this that the project length has been unacceptable, not just to all of you, but to all of us as well. Lots of odd things happened in this construction period, and, you know, we can apologize about that. It's not the way we wanted it to be for certain. And I know there's still outstanding items on that project. Council, other comments, questions?
I would just say that I don't think that the value is in single-family homes in that area. I think the value is in future development opportunity. And that's where, as the mayor said, the problem we've had with the project, not acceptable. I think we've all voiced that over time, that the length of time it's taken for that project is not acceptable. So we're on the same page on that. But from a potential development value along that corridor, whether it's now 6 months, 6 years, 60 years, the value there is there. And honestly, in 60 years, we're probably talking about another assessment based on major rework on the roads because they've been traveled. So I believe that it's there. I think previous councils have believed that it's there. When it comes to using Marsh Lake Road as an example, it happened before this council, had I sat on that council, I would have not allowed those homes to not be assessed. I think the home there, I know personally one home sold on the north side of the road, and the value they received from the project vastly increased the value of their property, more than the assessed value. They received more than the assessed value that the county listed it at. And so when you say that we did that, I can tell you, following that project and getting the information on that project, would have not voted in the affirmative to allow them to not be assessed based on the value.
Can we ask, that's different too because it's also a county road, right? Is that not part of the reason?
Actually a city road.
Well, but it's going to become a county road.
Sorry.
It's going to become, it's going to become, and that's when they're going to get assessed. There
will
be assessments when it becomes a county road.
Yeah, that was a completely, it was a very different situation.
Still, the family that received the value saw it in their sale of the home. So the value is there. You just don't see it. When we redid, I did not want to do foundation work on my 50-year-old Victoria home, but I had to do foundation work. It cost us $50,000. Did I want to spend that on something that I'm not going to see right away? No. But if we choose to sell it, we'll see it. So the arguments are there, and I think that it's not a residential right now. The argument is it in the best interest over the next 25 to 30 years in that area, and is it residential or commercial? And in this instance, it's going to be commercial. I'm not going to say every single one of those properties, but at least 3, based on where the plan is going. So that's where I'm at.
Understood. That doesn't help these folks today.
I understand.
So, all right. Other questions, comments?
And just for council, I think that there's pretty widespread agreement that these projects do improve the properties that they were designed to serve, and there's longer range benefit to the value of those properties by being more desirable, because the longer term view of how we're going to access downtown drives up the value of those parcels. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. The question, one question that we might want to consider, and I'll leave us for discussion, is that the inordinate amount of time that was spent on this project. It has been frustrating. We have seen the emails, we've read them, we've directed staff address those concerns that have been brought to council. I think that in the fullness of time, that the city will ensure that the things that are yet to be completed will get completed. The city's got a good track record making good on their promises. So, you know, a potential idea, and I'll put it to us, is that would we want to reduce the assessment amounts by a number? Then we may need to consider that either tonight or table and consider it at a future juncture. To be good neighbors, to understand that these things are difficult and they take time. And, you know, we want citizens to be happy, but 0 is not the right number for this. There is somewhere that perhaps we can use our judgment and our equitable treatment on how to deal with these things and make a decision. So I'll put that idea out there. If we don't want to consider that, then that's something that is also in our purview.
Yeah. One of the things I would remind council is that we've already gone down from the 50% to the 30%, and we don't, it's 2% of this project cost. These assessments are 2% of the, is that correct, Kara, right? 2% of the project cost. So it's nowhere near what our typical policy is. So.
For the record, I have been upset with the fact that Three Rivers Park isn't paying an assessed value. I said it in meetings before this. I have an issue with that, but understand the reasoning behind it. I'm just going to put that out there again.
All right.
I also concur with Councilmember Ivansky on the time side of it.
Yeah.
I'm having heartburn over that. It was I think the number of 543 days is what I heard. So if my math is right there, that's a long time.
Yeah, sure is.
I mean, I know this is a little bit, I mean, since we're talking about, I mean, how do we avoid this from happening, right? Like, I mean, there's only so much you can obviously do, but are there things we can get back from the contractor? I mean, like, did they meet their obligations? I mean, I don't know, like.
Kara, is there a clause in the contract that allows any kind of recapture?
So by way of recollection, Mayor, members of the City Council, the primary problems related to the overall project schedule were started by Xcel Energy and then propagated by the other utility companies. So we buried overhead power as part of this project, which is a process in and of itself. They were delayed, behind, drug their feet, came and did some things, left. Then we had challenges with the other utilities that needed to be relocated. So, you know, that, and I'm simplifying, there's much more detail to that, but from a simplification basis, that was a driver of the delays associated with the project, and that isn't the contractor's fault in this particular case. Now, we've had some conversations internally. We have to pay a bill for burying the overhead power lines. At some point, Xcel will get around to billing us, which tends to be delayed for quite some time, but do we have any recourse, you know, to not have to pay the full amount with the damages that extra costs we've incurred as a result of the delay? So that, you know, that is a conversation for a different day with a different set of information in front of us. But yeah, it undoubtedly has been one of the most challenging and delayed projects the city has experienced in my time. So I concur and appreciate the frustration.
Yeah.
Can you speak to some of the things we heard, some of them, I think, at least for me, for the first time, about like power lights not, or the lights not having power to them and having to redig up? Like, are those, like, is that stuff where we get, you know, obviously that's a mistake by the contractor, that right? Or
well, it ties back to Xcel again. Okay. So where we were told we could serve the lights from didn't end up being the location we could serve them from. So we had to work with the utility, the subcontractor to our contract, to bore a new line under the road to make that connection. It's going to be bright once we power up those lights, so there may be some benefit to not having them turned on yet because there's a lot of lights in that area, but we're getting close to getting that resolved. Striping, I think, was happening today or tomorrow, last I heard. And then the work on the west end, when we originally bid this project, the second project was supposed to be under construction as this one came to an end. And then the Marco McLean project got delayed by over a year. So we have a temporary state on the west end of the project that we need to reconcile with the next bid package that's sitting on the shelf waiting to bid shortly, if they close, which I'm told is happening this month.
So my question goes to Bob. Legally talking from an Excel standpoint, or in the Excel issue, because if they're the ones that, what is the likelihood we come out in the positive versus any kind of legal fees we're going to incur going to war with them over trying to reclaim something?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I like Akira's answer that that's sort of difficult to sort of put that calculus into your decision making tonight. But that said, you're a member, the city's a member of the Suburban Rate Authority, which happens to be a joint powers group that my firm represents, that deals with Excel and other big utilities on utility matters. This is a hot button issue across all cities across the metro. I don't want to point out Excel specifically, except that I sort of have to. Centerpoint is also not the quickest on the uptake sometimes, but Excel has had now a history, I think, in the last several years of being slow in a lot of cases on projects similar to what Kara is describing and what you're very familiar with on this project. So it is not at all a novel problem that cities are having with Excel. Cities have statutory authority to impose penalties on utilities for being delayed in these kind of projects. To my knowledge, no city has taken the steps necessary to do that, but that's a discussion now that the Suburban Rate Authority on your behalf is starting to have. So there may be avenues that are opening up for getting at the concern.
At what point do we impose a statutory penalty for this based on previous work? Are they going to argue that we're doing it after the fact? Or can we do it and say we're doing it because of this project as an example, and then impose it on this project and every project moving forward?
Yeah, Mayor, Council, I mean, you're making a smart point by asking that question. If we were to do something, we collectively, or you, Victoria, were to do something, would Excel potentially say, you're doing this, it's too late, you can't get us for that last project? Sure, they may say that. I don't want to try and give you legal advice about whether that's going to work or not, but yeah, you're raising an appropriate question that we'll have to wrestle with.
All right, Council. Yeah, Councilmember Roberts, please.
So, I know you brought up the point, Mayor, that we've already reduced this from 50 to 30, right? 30. But to Greg's point, if we do determine that, because of the delays and stuff, we want to reduce it more, what does that look like? Does that mean staff would look at this a little bit closer and you bring this back to us at a different time, or?
Yeah, City Manager Hardy, please.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Roberts. Good question. And one of the things that we have to do once you adopt an assessment role is to provide property owners 30 days to pay without interest. So they can pay that up front without interest. And so we have to have enough time for people to make arrangements to make those payments. The reason that's important is because of the time of the year that this is happening. So we also have to certify, as I noted earlier, our city finance department must certify any special assessments to the county annually. That certification must be done by November 30th. So backing that up, what does that mean? If you make a decision today, we would have about mid-November would provide people 30 days to pay, and that gives our finance department enough time to do those calculations and make certification to the county before the November 30th deadline. where if you were to table this, let's say you wanted to consider a different amount and have staff bring back a recommendation for something different, we could certainly do that. October 28th, our finance director has already communicated is too tight for her to turn that certification, to do those calculations and turn that certification around timely to the county. And so if this is something that you'd like to entertain, we would also request that the council identify a special meeting date to specifically probably throwing something out there next Monday evening for you to revisit that item. That would provide our finance department adequate time to certify the payments after the 30 days that you would give people to make the payment without interest, and provide the finance department enough time to certify before the county's deadline.
All right, so we're talking about $60,000 total in assessments here. What I would recommend, the proposal that has come before us is already discounted and, outside of our policy, and that is what the staff is recommending. So my question to council is, do we want to talk through what we might want the staff to take a look at, or does council have a feeling amongst themselves about how they'd like to reconcile this evening?
So to be clear, we have essentially three choices. Choice number one, adopt as is. Choice number two is to give staff time, but that would mean that we would probably have to have a special meeting so that they can meet their deadlines.
Correct.
Or choice number three, if we choose to do a reduction, we would do that in conference tonight and make a decision on that course of action. Is that a fair?
Yep.
And with option number two, we'd have to have that special meeting prior to the 28th.
So it would be.
Right. So if we chose to go that route, we're probably like meeting in, are your calendars clear in a week from now to do that? So.
All right.
Two issues. One, that we have to follow up. We have no recourse in terms of immediacy with Excel and the prior project. Keeping the current landowners in the loop on that particular process is probably something that would benefit us moving forward, to understand what the city can do to help them because of the length and the unacceptable length of that project. Understanding that it's not a standard time length in Victoria. It's not something we regularly do to drag our feet, and things like an Excel sometimes do stand in our way. The assessed value in looking at what this project is and taking this project on as it is, I think the value is there. We've demonstrated the value is there. We did have a conversation again, as we did in the last special assessment conversation, way into the fact that there are a limited number of property owners in this area. And we did step outside our policy and reduce the amount. So with that, I think moving ahead on this while bifurcating the Excel issue out on the other project to come to some impacted resident policy would probably be a good move. And that's to be determined, but I think that's the best thing that we can do. So I would let's move ahead with what we've already talked about and discussed over the last 2 years for this special assessment in this area, for the 13.5 acres, which is the original reason for the special assessment.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Gunderson, are you making a motion? Or no?
I thought we were looking for discussion. Are we looking for a motion?
Well, I'm looking for discussion. I'm not clear on where you're headed with your comment.
Move ahead on this special assessment, bifurcate out or whatever. We have to separate the two. We have to separate out the Excel issue from this, because the Excel issue has nothing to do on this particular assessment. So moving ahead on this particular assessment, I think, is what we are talking about, what we need to do.
I understand. Thank you.
I mean, so again, if we decided to reduce it lower, knowing that a lot of the delays were out of our control because it was Excel, and what kind of precedent are we setting for? I mean, I guess you spoke earlier, Bob, like that in a specific project we should keep, right? Have state similar, right? Keep it the same, but one from 2 years ago versus now, right? We can change it. So, I mean, are we setting, if God forbid there's issues with another project in the future, like setting precedent, I suppose, to keep reducing down when things go bad?
Yeah, Mayor, Council, I'm always not a fan of thinking that things we do set precedents, because there's always competing facts, different facts on different projects. I mean, I would candidly be concerned about the city saying, because this project, which is very, very much like many, many other projects we've done and assessed for, this one, though, doesn't provide any special benefit and we're not going to assess at all. That, to me, is starting to raise a legal issue. I mean, you've said in the past through your actions for decades now that you believe that your projects provide benefit, and I think that is sort of a precedent that the city, it seems to me, has set. As far as making a judgment about whether delays are worth something in terms of reducing the assessment, I'd have to leave that to you. I mean, that doesn't raise any legal concern if you wanted to do that, but I don't have much intelligent to say about that.
I don't think you can combine the two and say that because of this project, we reduced this. I think we take that other project on as a fight with Excel, along with some of the other communities that have experienced the same thing, and fight for the residents on that level. And that is a separate issue.
But they're not going to get anything out of it.
We don't, if we create, is there a legal precedent or legal value that says we could not, compensate or help affected residents because of that project and the delays, because it showed significant hardship?
Should we, if we should recoup some of those costs
If the city is compensated for the delay or the project, whatever it may be, for this significant delay, can we return that to the impacted residents or a portion, whatever it may be? It's broadly speaking, not.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, no is the answer. You can't literally write a check to the residents should you recover from Excel. Could you reassess down the road and reduce the assessments marginally in recognition of having gotten something from Excel? Yeah, theoretically you could do that.
Okay. So there is recourse to make this current number smaller than what it currently is.
Yep.
But we would be dealing with trying to refund?
Yeah, no, Mayor and Council, I mean, first of all, let me just say, practically speaking, the administrative burden of doing that would far exceed the amount of assessments, the amount of properties assessed here that we're talking about. But in a theoretical way, you could do that. You can reassess and reduce the assessments on a project. It's difficult, and you have to work with the county, and et cetera, et cetera. So practically speaking, I think that's quite unlikely to happen, but I'm being asked, could it theoretically happen? Yeah, sure, it could theoretically happen.
So I think
part of the issue,
we're just trying to go down the Excel route with this at this point is just an entanglement that it muddies the water. It further complicates the issue.
well, and then what does it go back to? Timing, more time,
Well,
which is this whole.
exactly. I mean, right. I mean, it's just.
what we're wrestling with here is providing some compensation to these residents for the delay. And I mean, this unprecedented delay in a way that we can through lowering their assessments. By lowering their assessments, my concern is we have provided value. By lowering their assessments, I don't want to say that we haven't provided that value, but on the other hand, I am very sympathetic to what these neighbors have gone
I think with this project is there's exigent circumstances with this.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
there were a lot of things that happened. We all have the email traffic on it that just would not happen in other projects. And Also, when we might consider the percentage of people that would be affected by that, because there's so few parcels here, the disparate impact is greater on a pro rata basis. So, and I think that I'll put this out there, that I would be comfortable with reducing the 60,000 overall by 10% and reassessing on that in his representative share back to these parcels.
Okay. So,
and that's where I would be comfortable.
okay, so.
I would just also add, right, like to your point you made earlier, right, we've already reduced it, right? We have went from 75 to 50 to 30. But I would counterpoint that we did the same reduction for the last hearing we just had, and that stuff went really well, right? So we gave them a reduction, and they got things done. I mean, as far as we know, well. This didn't, so that's where I'm kind of like, we maybe should reduce it to Greg's number. I don't know. I mean, I guess I would leave it up to staff to figure out what that better number.
I don't know, okay, we should probably back up here for a second. Greg, do you want to make a motion that we reduce the assessed amount by 10%?
But before I would like to ask.
We can have some.
Councilman, I would like to ask Dana about because I would like our finance department to maybe weigh in before we decide to determine the number.
Ms. Hardy, please.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So playing on the example of Councilmember Abansky's recommendation, if that were to be something that you were to entertain and agree to, one of the options that you could have tonight that would save you from having to call a special meeting would be to agree on the amount. If it's a 10% reduction, if it's an amount specific, whatever that might be, we can make a modification to the resolution this evening on the fly and have you adopt that. And then we would not have a need to call for a special meeting and still be able to meet all those deadlines. Are there concerns though? Like, I mean, I'm just asking, right? Like, should this be something though that we discuss with finance department to determine if this is like what numbers we should be at actually?
Ms. Hardy, please.
So, Councilmember Roberts, Mayor, members of the council, I think at this point it's completely at your discretion, completely at your discretion. And what would be helpful for us is if you were to deviate from the resolution this evening and wanted to do a reduction, that you be very specific with what that is instead of leaving that up to staff so we could process that.
Yeah, I feel like staff has given us their recommendation, and so we should make a decision about that this evening.
So the reduction will come out of the Parks and the Roads Fund, and that would kick into our general levy, right? For what our general budget.
So the question I think you're asking is, if we reduce the assessment, the burden of the rest of that assessment goes back to the taxpayers versus.
That is correct.
To all the taxpayers versus just this group of taxpayers.
And any assessed reduction on any project, that's what's going to happen.
Correct. Yep. Correct.
Correct. Regardless of what numbers, if staff came back with a different number, then we'd evaluate that different number. And then we would now have a decision of essentially 1, 2, 3. Do we stick with the original? Do we stick with what we were thinking this evening? Or do we go to the staff number? It's just, we do have a timing issue.
Yeah.
So it's a question of whether or not we.
I think we do our best behind the dais to put a lot of thought into what the numbers are based on staff recommendations, and they're the ones that work with the numbers every day. Things that we can't foresee are issues like we just saw, and that we can't. And if they happen, we're limited in our recourse for that area right now. And I think The question that we're wrestling with is did that put an undue on this? Did that put undue burden on this particular assessment? And I understand the length of time is a pain, and some of the other things you go through in the moment is a pain, but does it put an undue burden on the sale of a property in 15 years? And that's what we're dealing with. That's the question that we have. This assessment, if this property is sold in 15 years, it benefits from the project that's done. That should be far complete by then. Do they benefit from this project and then in like terms by the assessment? We've said yes. We've said yes. We've prior to this, we talked about that the impact of 50% was too much on those homeowners or those property owners, so we reduced it to 30. And now we're talking about, do we reduce it more on the inconvenience of an organization that was outside of our control that had to complete work before the contractor could complete their work? So over 15 years, yeah, I think, or 10 even, 5 probably, depending on whenever these decide to come up for a commercial sale. And I think it meets that benefit.
I'll just,
Councilmember Rice.
on top of what Councilmember Gunderson said, I agree with those points. The one part, again, I'm going back to is I look at it more further than an inconvenience for these folks with the time of the project. That's where I kind of draw the line. I think it's beyond the inconvenience side.
Yeah.
Which is why I think we're having these discussions.
Now are we trying to prove damages? That's a mess.
No, I don't think we're trying to prove damages.
I think this is something within our.
I think we're trying to be, we were elected to these positions to review the facts, review the circumstances, and make informed judgments on how we're going to proceed with how we're going to treat projects with our residents. So, again, I'll reiterate, we're in 3 positions. We can defer to staff, but then we'll have the consequences of another meeting that will need to be here for next Monday. We can make a motion for a reduced amount, or we can make a motion for the full amount. So, I think towards that end, I will make a motion for the approval of a resolution adopting the final assessment rule for Steger Lake Lane West Phase 1 improvements to be reduced by 10% of, or $6,000 of the $60,000 total. That's the motion that I'm going to put forward.
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Ivansky. We have a motion and a second by Councilmember Roberts. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Good conversation.
Thanks, everyone. That was.
Next item. Item 6.4, a sketch plat for residential development on the Kuchemeister property in our South Growth area. Presenting that this evening is City Planner Brian McCann. Mr. McCann, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council members. Tonight we have a application for a sketch plat review from the Pulte Group for the Kuchemeister residential property. As you're well aware, the sketch plat process is just to receive initial feedback from the Plan Commission, the City Council, so there will be no approvals or actions taken this evening. You are just here to provide guidance to assist the applicant with any subsequent applications that they may proceed with. Inform the applicant now of any specific comments or concerns with the proposed development so that they can incorporate those within future submittals or decide if they will move forward with the request. So looking at the location and area, it's a single parcel, about 82.5 acres in size. It's north of County Road 10, Engler Boulevard, west of the proposed West Creek Village residential development, and south of the Marsh Lake Hunting Club. The Pulte Group is proposing 163 single-family homes and 80 townhomes with this sketch plat. The parcel is generally flat, vacant farmland currently with some existing homes and structures. There are also pockets of wetlands highlighted on the screen in the purple and yellow portions. Also some wooded areas, and a portion of the West Chaska Creek runs through the north area of the property. There are also some overhead power lines to the south, and then it's also worth noting that there is no direct access to this parcel. They currently utilize a shared driveway from County Road 10 with the adjacent parcel to the south. So for the 3 types of uses that they're showing here, 2 of them are single-family products, and then the townhomes that I mentioned, so I'll just break it down into 3 phases here. The northernmost phase adjacent to the Chaska Creek are the 80-foot wide lots shown in red. They're proposing 52 of those lots. And then moving south, they have 70-foot wide lots. They're proposing 111 of those lots. And then further south, adjacent to the overhead power lines, are the 80 proposed 80 proposed townhome lots on a public street. For annexation and rezoning, it's within Laketown Township, which means an annexation is required. And when that happens, you're well aware that an agricultural zoning is automatically established for the property. The applicant is proposing a PUD rezoning with R1 for single family and a proposed standard R3 rezoning for the townhome portions. And then, once again, as you're aware, rezonings are discretionary, meaning if you don't like the product before you don't have to rezone a property. We have the most discretion based on our zoning ordinance for rezonings. So the deviations that they are proposing with this development, I've listed the standard R1 requirements on the top side of this table and their proposed deviations highlighted in green. So they're requesting a reduction from 12,000 square feet to 9,100 square feet for the minimum lot area, a 10-foot lot width reduction, and then a 5-foot setback reduction for the front and rear. And then, as I mentioned, they are seeking standard R3 zoning for the townhomes, and they're meeting all the requirements of that district. Looking at our comprehensive plan, it's guided for a blend of low-density residential, medium-density residential, and open space. Regarding the single-family portions and the townhome portions, they are meeting our minimum density requirements for those areas. A comprehensive plan amendment would be required, though, to align the colors on the map. We've received guidance from Met Council on the past regarding this. So looking at their proposal overlaid with our comp plan lines, we would need to align the single-family portions with the yellow and the medium-density portions with the orange. Another portion of our comprehensive plan, we have a growth area and phasing map to plan development in accordance with utility extensions. So the West Creek Village property just to the east is within our 2021 to 2030 range, but this parcel is just outside of that range. It's in our 2031 to 2040 area. What this means is that this would require an additional comprehensive plan amendment to bring this into this decade, which affects our utility projections, population, households, several aspects of our comprehensive plan, which means additional work to analyze these changes and implement them into our comp plan amendment for the Met Council. Additionally, our comp plan shows the local neighborhood collector, the future extension of Red Fox Drive, cutting through the center of the site. Based on the plan that was provided by the applicant, they are shifting that realignment to the western properties. What this does, it results in some double frontage lots and also has implications for our future road network. And we also need some additional analyses to determine our future road network, not just for this road, but all of our roads extending further west in that 2031 to 2040 range. So I've highlighted the road here to the north. You can see based on where it was previously through the site, they've realigned it to the west, which creates those double frontage lots with the internal local road in front and the collector road to the rear. Moving on to the architecture, they did provide some renderings of the types of lots that they would have for the 70-foot wide lots, which are shown on the screen here, as well as the 80-foot wide lots and the townhome products that they would be looking for those 80 townhomes. Looking at parking, we require 2 enclosed spaces per unit for single family and 2 spaces with 1.5 enclosed per unit for the townhomes. They do not have any guest parking proposed with this sketch plat, but as far as we can tell, the products that they're showing with driveway space and internal garages would meet our minimum parking requirements. Looking at our landscaping and tree preservation, they would be required to have boulevard trees along local roads, as well as minimum planting requirements of 3 trees per single family unit and 1 tree per 1,000 square feet of required open space for the townhomes. They would also need to provide foundation plantings with the townhomes, and then 25-foot buffers would be required between R1 and R3 uses, as well as for the double-fronted lots that I mentioned earlier. And I added another note in here that a buffer should be considered between the southern side of the townhomes with the adjacent single-family user right off of Highway 10, because they would have some impacts with the townhomes directly behind them. Also, there's a minimum open space requirement of 50% for the single-family units and 25% for townhomes. And if they exceed 20% of removal of significant and heritage trees on the property, they would need to provide additional trees for mitigation. Looking at our shoreland overlay district, it affects approximately 15 parcels within this area because they're within 300 feet of the Chaska Creek. The townhomes are outside of that area, so we do not require a tier analysis for this development. And then these single-family homes that are within the area would have to comply with our minimum 25 or maximum 25% impervious, our minimum percent of 50 for the open space, and the minimum 75-foot lot width. Looking at park dedication, the pedestrian connections, in total for this development, they would need to dedicate 9.74 acres of land to satisfy our parkland dedication requirements, or a cash fee of $1 million, $22,700. As shown on the plan, they don't have any parks proposed. They also did not identify any trails or sidewalks. As far as staff can tell with our initial review of the sketch plat, we did not see any other neighborhood amenities. And then it's worth noting that the closest park is the Marsh Hollow Park, approximately a half mile away from this development. The Parks and Recreation Committee reviewed this at their meeting on September 16th, and they did recommend inclusion of trails and sidewalks, but were also acceptable of a combination of park, land, and cash fee. And then I will pass it over to Kara.
Ms. Karen, welcome back.
I'm back. Do you want to just click to the next slide? So I'm going to cover my normal topics of that I typically cover for new development, but specifically related to streets. What's notable is the extension of Creekside Lane through the site. That would be a collector road, so that is a neighborhood collector that we've started to construct in the Huntersbrook neighborhood, the Marsh Hollow neighborhood, that really is going to serve as a spine access for the houses through here. They are showing Creekside Lane through the site. What's notable about how they're showing it is they are not showing any direct access to Creekside Lane, which is consistent with what we want to see for a collector road like Creekside. Specifically related to the alignment of Red Fox. So because Red Fox, when you look at the map that Brian provided, it's just showing like a blue dashed blob through the area. Because Red Fox through this portion of land was outside of our 2030 area, we haven't planned a specific alignment for Red Fox, and that's something that if the council is going to entertain extending development into this area, we're going to want to take a much closer look at what the alignment of Red Fox should be, specifically relative to Chaska Creek. So we want to make sure that long-term we know where we're going to cross Red Fox over Chaska Creek in a way that's cost-effective and not creating a connection that becomes a big problem down the road for the community. And then the project is showing 2 potential connection locations to County Road 10. Specifically, there is a corridor study that the council's aware of for Highway 10 all the way out past County Road 43 that includes a realignment of County Road 10 through this area. So the developer is aware of that and is showing that potential realignment. But if development were to move forward in this area, we would need to work with the county in terms of access locations to Highway 10. The county provided comments noting that a traffic impact analysis would be required as part of a project. Grading and stormwater, this one's easy compared to the other elements of discussion. It's in Carver County WMO, and so as part of our ordinance, wetlands, including buffers, shall be located on outlots deeded to the city, and then stormwater facilities need access. So that's fairly straightforward. But utilities, so sanitary, sewer, and water would be extended to this area from Creekside Lane. But as Brian noted, points west of the West Creek Village project are outside of the 2030 boundary in our comprehensive plan. So we would need to account for that through a comp plan amendment update. In addition, well number 6 needs to be completed and permitted. I'm happy to report they were working on startup this week, so the completed part is very close. I'm still working on the permitted part. And then I do want to note that, as I did for West Creek Village, this is in our search area for our next water treatment plant. So figuring out the timing of that and location of that would be part of the work that would go into a comp plan amendment that would need to be considered if a project were to proceed.
So just to highlight the summary of the deviations for the PUD that they're proposing, it's a reduction in the R1 standards, as I mentioned before. Also, they do not have any sidewalks or trails shown, no 25-foot landscape buffers that are required, no parks, private amenities, or community gathering spaces, and no guest parking for the townhomes. The Planning Commission did review this at their meeting on October 1st. They expressed some concerns with the required comprehensive plan amendments, and a lot of the discussion revolved around the accesses to Highway 10, as well as the desire to avoid the double frontage lots that I mentioned. They also had questions regarding density with our current comp plan requirements and the Met Council's 2050 Imagine plan. They also expressed a desire for parks, trails, and sidewalks incorporated with this development, as well as the berms that I mentioned earlier. They did request review of a revised concept plan if the applicant does decide to move forward. So with that, as I mentioned at the beginning, no action is required this evening. I've provided a few points for discussion for the City Council to consider. Staff are available for questions, and there are representatives of the application in the audience this evening.
Very good, thank you. So right off the bat, a couple of concerns for me. I want to echo the concerns that I saw from the Planning Commission, but I know that County Road 10 is a big deal for us. We are currently in conversation with the county about access, but they have kind of kicked that can down to maybe 2028, so like 3 years from now, right? And does this project actually leapfrog another plot that's not currently being developed?
Mayor and council members, that's correct. The West Creek Village project that I mentioned, as you can see a portion of it here to the east of this project that we're talking about, they have gone through the sketch plat process, but they have not applied for preliminary plat approvals. They don't have any entitlements to the property, so this would leapfrog to the next site.
Okay, so that's a concern. Then the other thing in regard to the product that's being proposed, we have a lot of that product. What we don't have a lot of is single, like Rambler level, single level townhomes, those kinds of products. And I think that's what we're hearing from our residents. That's the kind of product that they're looking for. That will help them downsize out of their big 2-story homes into something that's more manageable for them in their retirement years. So from my perspective, I'd like to see some one-level living available to our residents. With that, council, other comments, questions for these folks?
I mean, I guess I'd echo what you're saying. We've done a lot of developments, and I think we've tried to do a good job of getting different types of products out there, and we've also just getting more, right? We needed more townhomes, we needed more apartments, things like that. I think we're at a point now, though, where we can be picky, and we should be picky. We need things that are unique. We need, like you said, single level living that keeps, that our seniors can live in. This, I'll be honest, seems a little generic to me. And then I don't like that, again, we're getting far out and no gathering space, no parks, no trails, no sidewalks. It doesn't feel like a neighborhood. It doesn't feel like a community without that stuff. I think I think if we're gonna do things like this, if we're gonna jump, and it sounds like spend a decent amount of money to do something in this area when we're 2040 to 2050, right? Was or 2030 to 40, was it? Sorry, yep, 2030 to 40. Like we need to get what that our residents want, what we really want, and to me this isn't it.
Well, things that jump out, I'm assuming the black line means, Brian, is a lot line. Is it? On the picture you have up on the right.
Mayor and council members, this black line, is this the one? That's the separation between the townhome area and the single family.
And on the side closer to 10?
Correct.
That's a lot line?
Correct.
Okay. I have concerns. What does this development do? What are you going to be able to do? What is the landowner going to be able to do in that lot right off 10? Other than maybe be compensated a little bit by the county for that road adjustment. Maybe added in, would this be a phase? Would there be something going there? Or would that be different?
Mayor and Councilmember Gunderson, this property is entirely separate from this development proposal. What I can tell you is that it's guided for medium density, so eventually it's anticipated to match the townhomes that are proposed just to the north, but no, there's no plan incorporated with the sketch plat to include that parcel.
So the way that the road comes in, it's a pretty narrow opening between the properties. That's a one way in, one way out, or coming right off a county road. I don't know. I'd have to see how we would plot this out to make that a cohesive development with the changes on the realignment for County 10. I'm old enough and been here long enough to know when we changed our R1, we did a lot. We took a lot into account, and I know that the planner at the time, Ben, really worked at finding that sweet spot. And every project that I've seen come through always looks at shortening the lot area and the setbacks. And I'm not interested in something that looks the way that does with smaller lot lines and smaller lots. We really worked hard to kind of find something that was going to work because we didn't want that smaller feel. And I think this is a much smaller feel. We continue to say that 10 years ago, and I'm going to say it now. Getting to be the vice chair of the planning commission when we changed our to R1s, it still holds true that it's important to me that we stay that way. I don't want to see any deviation anymore, unless they're going to bring a lower cost product to address a low, a low income for to use bad words that everybody freaks out on, but a reduced income project where there's affordable housing, which we don't have. I can tell you right now, we don't have it. And that's the project we need in this area. And until we get something that's there, I think we hold strong to our setbacks, our lot sizes, and get the kind of neighborhoods that we wanted and that we designed our zoning districts for, R1 to R3 and our commercial.
Thank you. Other questions?
I think I would echo Council Member Gunderson's position that he's absolutely right. We've both spent time in the Planning Commission. We've have seen this continuous assault on those standards that we set for what we view Victoria to be. This, and I love to use the term monotonous every time I can in our conversations, but this is monotony at its finest in terms of how this is laid out, how things are snug. The trying to pull the comp plan that's out in the future forward and the necessary expenses and staff resource time to do that. And I think that we have consternation about what those standards are as a city the way it is, and our reticence about others making decisions for us as to what we're going to guide Victoria into the future for. And then, just the litany of things that the Planning Commission reviewed. And you've heard my position on, we are routinely asked to exchange cash for parks. I think we need to hold firm and say, no, these are the opportunities to add those amenities now, and we're not going to sacrifice that for money. It's not what Victoria has been in its history, and it doesn't seem like that's the future that we want to guide ourselves into. And then with this particular layout, there's I think an overarching question as to what that property owner to the south of this between Highway 10 is. I think that there's a lot of visioning around that. This just doesn't feel like our visioning for what that is. And then to just keep further pushing Red Fox as a collector road out into parcels where there's landowners that we have no idea when they're ready to put that in, but we would have a concerted need for that immediately. We have a need for it now, which we don't. We need other development to push that direction. So, and we all know the contentious issue that we had with realigning Red Fox Drive through another subdivision and all the accommodations that had to get done to just push that through there. I think we're all familiar with what we had to do with Timber Trail and having to take $500,000 of this city's resources and push it into that development to get that done. And then this just further complicates that matter. So I just don't think that this is the right time for this product right here at in this submitted form.
Councilmember Reif, any other comments?
Agreement on a lot of this, and it just doesn't fit our vision and the timing. I think we've all talked about one level. I think one level continues to come back. So if somebody can come up with a strong one level community for Victoria, that's a great fit.
Yes. Yeah. We have some neighborhoods that we really that are highly sought after with that one level living, and Greencrest is one of them. Garden Path is another one of them. So, the more that we can push that direction, that helps. All right, staff, this is an item for discussion, so anything else you need from council here?
None from me, Mayor.
All right, very good. So moving on, the final item on our regular agenda is item 6.5, which is a closed session this evening. It's a closed session for Highway 5 and 11, the downtown Victoria West project property acquisitions. So pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.05 subdivision 3C, I'd like to make a motion to close the meeting to discuss for Highway 511 downtown Victoria West project property acquisitions regarding the following property PID numbers. Do I need to list these? I need to list these. Here they are. 65.5400020, 65.0142100, 65.0110800, 65.0820020, 65.0820010, 65.0142500, 65.0141010, and 65.01411. I'm going to start that one over again. 65.0141100. Do I have a second?
Second.
Who was the second?
I second.
Councilmember Roberts has a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We are in closed session. Once we're done, we'll return and reconvene the regular meeting of the council. Okay. I make a motion to reconvene the regular meeting of the city council. Can I get a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. There are no more items on our regular agenda, so we'll move on to reports and emerging issues. Ms. Hardy, reports from staff? None from staff, Madam Mayor. Council, any reports from council?
None for me, Mayor.
Oh, yeah, Councilmember Gunderson, please.
Not gonna probably, sorry, it comes from one of our other conversations. The attorney's gone, but I wanted to get it out there that we just put a monetary value on things that were outside of our control, and that's a basis for arguing against Excel. And I wanted to talk to Bob about that, but I would just bring that up to him, that we just put a value by reducing the amount in our
Assessments?
thank you, in our special assessment, that we all seem to be aligned with, that it was a direct result of Excel. So when we argue that, the 10%, which was $60,000, is something that should be brought up if we're going to go back to Excel.
$6,000.
$6,000, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The 10% of $60,000. So we put $6,000 on that. So when we argue that, on top of some of the other things that might have caused a delay, that's where because we reduced it with the reasoning that the delay that was outside of our circumstance caused that. So.
Okay, so just to be clear, so that I have an understanding where you're coming from, we've ascribed a number, and you're making the comment that when we have the conversations with Excel about the delays of this project, you feel that it's essential to that conversation to let them know that we took a monetary hit for the delays that they contributed to a project.
Yep.
Now, and there are likely other delays as well, but I'm tracking with you. I understand.
I'm just saying we use that as the majority
we
to
use that
reduce
as something
the cost
to
the resident, and so there's a cost to the greater community.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Gunderson. I concur.
Okay. No more items to come before the council this evening, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We stand